The first thing I remember after the impact was the taste of copper in my mouth and the sound of the cabin alarm cycling under torn insulation. And the second thing I remember was that I could not turn my head to the left because something in my neck had decided, for the moment, to be done turning. I was 43 years old. I had been flying Federation freight on the outer routes for 14 years. I had filed a flight plan that morning out of Marek 7 for a routine boundary run across the kilometres upland. 6 pallets of medical resupply and a sealed diplomatic case, 2 pilot crew, 90-minute hop. Second pilot was a younger man named Ren Soler, 3 years out of training, good hands, a wife at home expecting their first child in the 7th month. He had been telling me about her between system checks when the starboard nacelle let go without warning. No fire light, no overheat tone, just the dull mechanical wrongness of a turbine eating itself. And then we were not flying anymore. We were falling. And then we were not falling. We were stopped. He had not made it. I knew this before I had unbuckled, because the angle of his head against the harness post was the angle a head takes only when nothing inside it is choosing the angle. I did not look at his face. I did not need to. I unstrapped my own harness with one hand and pushed the shattered crash panel away from my legs and dragged myself up out of the seat and got my left boot under me on the cabin floor and stood. And the cabin tilted under me at 23 degrees because we had come down on the slope of a chalk ridge, not the flat. The transmitter was dead. I saw that on the first sweep. The face panel of the comms unit had taken a strut through it, and the readout was a constellation of nonsense. The EPIRB had launched on impact. I could see the trace of its burn arc through the cracked dome window, a thin white scribble against the bright sky. But the EPIRB only sent a pulse. It did not send a position. Whoever heard the pulse would know that a Federation craft had gone down somewhere along the Marek 7 corridor. That was all they would know. They would have to come find me. I worked through it the way you work through any wreck. The survival kit was half flooded with hydraulic fluid. I salvaged the canteen, the folding knife, the thermal blanket, the spool of cordage, the small tool set, the 2 protein bricks. The sidearm was in the locker behind the pilot's seat, and the locker had held. I took it and 3 magazines and clipped the holster to my belt. My own service tablet had been thrown out of its mount on impact and was lying face down on the cabin floor in a small puddle of cooling fluid. And when I picked it up, the screen was a black mirror with a hairline crack across the corner. I went out through the rupture in the starboard side because the cabin door was buckled into its frame. The kilometres upland came in at me all at once, pale red dust on a thin layer of pebbled chalk, high thin air, mid-morning sun at maybe 18 degrees over the eastern ridge, no shade for as far as I could see in 3 directions, the 4th direction taken up by the smoking wreckage of my own freight shuttle and the long black scar of its landing. I stood for a minute and breathed. The air at this altitude was dry enough to bite the back of the throat. I knew the topography of the upland from 20 crossings. I knew there was a Federation listening post on a chalk shelf 18 kilometers downslope to the southwest, 2-man rotation, light-grade resupply, low-band relay. I knew the 3 water sources between here and there. I knew the Predator pack pressure was higher on the eastern slopes than the western. I had filed all of this in my head over the years the way a pilot files weather, because you never know when the weather will be the thing that saves you. I took a long pull from the canteen and put it back on my hip. I looked at the wreck. I looked at the sky. I started walking the ridge. It was the smoke that took me to the second wreck. Not my own smoke, mine was behind me, a thinning gray column. This was a different color, thinner, whiter, higher up the ridge, maybe 400 meters further along the spine. I went toward it because there was nothing else to go toward, and because I had been a pilot long enough to know that smoke meant something had come down. And if something had come down, then there might be people in it. And if there were people in it, then they were my problem until the listening post took them off my hands. The second wreck was nothing I recognized. Long and low and silver, no markings I could read, the hull skin a kind of beaten cream metal that had folded under impact in a way I had not seen Federation craft fold. It had come down harder than I had. Most of it was scattered across 200 meters of slope. The forward section had stayed mostly together, bent at the spine, half open like a cracked seed pod, and that was where the smoke was coming from. Not flames. Slow combustion of insulation, a kind of upholstery cook-off. I could smell it before I got close. I went in low and careful, because I did not know what was inside. What was inside was the cockpit, and what looked like a small forward compartment behind it, separated by a folded composite partition that had taken most of the impact load. In the cockpit, two figures, both dead, both of a species I had not seen before, tall and slender, pale lavender skin, silver pale hair, dressed in fitted silver and cream uniform that I would later learn meant something I was not equipped at that moment to understand. The pilot and co-pilot. They had been belted in. They had not survived the descent. I stood in the forward hatch for a moment and said the words you say when you find people who have gone where you have not, and then I went past them, because there was something making a sound in the compartment behind them. A small sound, steady, not a cry, not a moan, the kind of sound a person makes who has been hurt and has decided not to make a sound about it. I pushed the partition open. She was small, that is the first thing. Small enough that the seat restraint that should have held her shoulders had instead caught her under the arms, and she had hung in it for some part of an hour. And now, she was sitting on the floor of the compartment with the cut straps in her lap, looking up at the open partition with eyes that were the most unsettling shade of dark amethyst I had ever seen on anything alive. Her skin was the same pale lilac as the two in front. Her hair was a long silver braid over her left shoulder, singed at the very end where it had touched a hot surface during the cook-off. She wore what I thought at first was a kind of sleeping shift, long cream cloth, calf-length, simple, and on her left shoulder there was a flat carved silver pin in the shape of a folded wing, bent diagonally across the center where the impact had caught it. She looked at me. She did not look afraid. She looked at me the way a small person looks at any larger person who has just walked in, with the patient curiosity of someone waiting to find out what kind of larger person this one is. I crouched in the hatch frame to bring my face down to hers. "All right," I said. "All right, I'm here." She did not answer. She did not need to. She lifted both her arms toward me, a slow, deliberate gesture, palms up, the way a small person who has done this before signals to a larger person that the small person would like to be picked up. I went to her and got my hands under her shoulders and lifted, and she was lighter than I had expected, lighter than the children of my own people I had carried in my time, and her arms came around my neck with the careful certainty of a person who had decided what she was going to do. I carried her out of the wreck. I did not look at the two in the cockpit on the way past. There was no point. I needed to keep her looking forward. I sat her on a flat shelf of chalk 15 meters downslope and crouched in front of her again and ran my hands lightly down her shoulders, her sides, her arms, her legs, not touching anything I should not touch, just checking for the breaks and the soft places where the breaks hide. Nothing. Bruises on her ribs where the straps had caught her. A small abrasion on her right temple where the singed braid had been pressed against a hot surface, already crusted over. She was holding her left wrist a little stiffly, but I thought that was the wing pin, not the wrist. She had taken a hard landing in a craft built to take a harder one. She was, by any reasonable measure, all right. I lifted the canteen off my hip and unscrewed the cap and tipped it gently toward her mouth. She drank. 2 small sips, then a long one. She let me tip more in. Her hands came up and held the canteen at the rim, small fingers, 4 to a hand, the way some of the high-frontier species are. She looked at me over the top of the canteen. "Vareth," she said. That was the first time I heard it. I did not know what it meant. It was not a word in any of the 4 languages I had picked up enough of to get through a customs counter. It was clearly a question. There was the small rising inflection at the end. There was the way her eyes held mine while she said it, the way a child says a word she is offering you, not the way a child says a word she is testing. "I don't know that word," I said. "Sorry." She watched me say it. She did not look disappointed. She lowered the canteen, drank again, lowered it. She said it once more, softer. "Vareth." I gave her one of the protein bricks. Or rather, I unwrapped the protein brick and broke off a small corner and held it out on the flat of my palm so she could see it, and she took it, and she ate it the way a hungry person eats, neatly, without drama, and she let me give her another small corner after the first. I drank from the canteen myself when she had finished. Then I sat down on the chalk beside her and looked at the sky, which had a faint coral orange band along the horizon where the sun had begun its long midday angle, and I thought about what was now in front of me. The closest help was 18 kilometers downslope. There were 2 of us now. I was not certain how long it would be before whoever heard the EPIRB pulse converged. I was not certain anyone was going to converge. I had filed a routine flight plan. Someone would notice when I did not check in at the Marek 7 evening report. Someone after that would push the EPIRB pulse through correlation against the missed check-in. Someone after that would request a recovery sweep. 12 hours minimum, more likely 18. The listening post had a low-band relay and a beacon panel. If I could get to it, I could push a position-resolved signal out and shorten the wait by half. The child was watching my face while I thought. I could feel her watching. I turned to her. "Marl," I said, and tapped my own chest. "Marl Tavrek." She tilted her head a fraction. Then she touched her own small chest with 2 of her 4 fingers. "Velasan," she said. The carving on the wing pin. I had not had a close look at the etching yet, but I had registered the script even in the wreck, the small flowing strokes along the upper edge, and I would learn later that they spelled the name she had just spoken. Velasan. I rolled it across my tongue the way I roll an unfamiliar instrument identifier when I want to fix it. "Velasan," I said back. She nodded, small and serious. I lifted the wing pin gently from her shoulder. She let me. I turned it in my fingers, flat carved silver, the wing folded in a long sweeping curve, the diagonal bend across the center where the impact had caught it. There was a small clasp on the back, the simple kind, and the bend had not gone through the metal, only across it. I took the folding knife off my belt and pinched the pin between the back of the blade and the flat of my thumb and worked the metal back toward true. It took me 5 minutes. Velasan watched the whole thing without moving. When I was done, the wing was straight again, more or less. One of my eyes told me I had overcorrected by a degree. I pinned it back to her shoulder. She put her small hand on it once, lightly, as if to make sure I had done what I had said I was going to do, and then she put her hand down again. I lifted her up onto my hip and stood. She fit there. Her arms came around my neck. I started walking the ridge toward the long descent. There would be water 2 kilometers along, at a chalk cup spring I had logged twice on prior survey crossings. There would be shade past that, in the shadow of the western buttress where the morning sun came late. The chalk was firm under my boots and the dust came up only thinly, the way it does in the dry season. I walked at the pace of a man who had a long way to go and did not want to spend himself on the first hour. The child rode on my hip without sound. I kept one hand under her, the other free for balance. I thought as I walked. I am 43 years old and I have been flying these routes for 14 years, and I have lost a co-pilot, and I am carrying a small alien child whose people I have never seen down off a ridge toward a listening post that may or may not be staffed. And the thing I am most afraid of is not the descent. It is the fact that this child has stopped looking at the wreck behind us and has put her head against my shoulder. And that means that, for the next 18 kilometers, I am the only thing standing between her and the upland. I tightened my arm around her. I kept walking. We made the chalk cup spring before the sun was overhead. The water was good, the cup was full and clean, with a thin film of mineral on the surface that I skimmed off with the side of the canteen. I filled the canteen and dropped a purification tab in and watched the color change while Vela-san dipped her hands in the cup and washed them and her face, methodically, the way a small person washes who has been taught to wash by someone who took the matter seriously. When she was done, she dried her hands on the front of her shift and looked up at me. I gave her the canteen. She drank. I drank after her. We stood in the small shadow of a leaning chalkstone for 10 minutes while the noon heat passed its peak overhead, and then I lifted her back to my hip and we kept going. It was at the second water source, late in the afternoon, that I saw the tracks. The second source was a seep at the base of a switchback wall, a slow trickle that pooled in a cup of pebbled hollow and ran off down a narrow channel into the wash below. I knelt to fill the canteen again. I had been emptying it steadily into the child and into myself in roughly equal measure, and that was when I saw the print at the lip of the hollow. 6 stowed, 4 foot of a body that walks on 6 limbs. The print had been laid down in slightly damper sand than I was standing on, and the edges were sharp enough to tell me they had been laid no more than a few hours earlier. I followed the line with my eyes. 3 sets, then 2 more across the pebbled chalk. Then 2 more in a wider stride. That meant the animal had broken into a trot. 5 then, a pack of 5. Vorsenari. I knew the print from the Federation field guide pages and from one direct sighting 4 years back on the northern Karen Run, low-bodied, dusk-gray, heat tracking by infrared receptors in a forward-pointing cluster between the lower eye sockets, pack hunters at the edge of frontier human range. They did not, in the literature, take adult humans. They took small mammals, fledgling cliff birds, occasional smaller carnivores. There was no entry for what they did with a small Velsaran child carried by a freight pilot, because no field guide had had reason to enter that yet. The pack had crossed the seep ahead of us and continued downslope, toward the listening post. They were running our line. I sat back on my heels and thought it through. Going back up was not an option. I would not climb back up to the ridge with a child on my hip in the descending heat with no shelter and no water. Cutting laterally meant a longer descent and a longer time in the open. Pressing on meant catching the pack at whatever choke they chose to set up at, and they would set up at a choke because that was what they did. Vorsenari were patient. They cycled. They cycled across the backslope to cut you at the throat of a pass, and then they came in from both sides. I drew the topo card in my head and looked for the choke they would pick. There was one. About 6 kilometers downslope, where the descent route narrowed through a slot canyon between 2 chalk shoulders, the kind of cut a heat tracker would love because the heat of the prey would pool in the slot and bounce back off the walls. They would set themselves at the lower mouth. They would expect me to come down through the narrow at mid-afternoon, when the heat in the slot would be highest. I would not come down through the narrow at mid-afternoon. I lifted Vela-san into my arms and stepped away from the seep and started up, not back exactly, but laterally and slightly up. Onto a goat track I had logged once on the survey crossings, a thin line of broken chalk that ran along the upper edge of the western buttress, and would let me come down into the slot from above, at the upper mouth. On the side the pack would not be watching, well after the heat of the day had passed. The goat track was bad. It was bad enough that I would not have walked it without a child if I had not had to. The chalk under my boots was friable in patches, and the drop on the open side was 40 meters straight down onto a scree slope, and Vela-san rode on my hip without making a sound, both her arms wrapped around my neck, her small breath against my collar. I went one careful boot print at a time. I did not look down. I looked at the line of the track 3 meters ahead of me, and I picked the next 3 boot prints, and then I picked the next 3. It took us an hour and a quarter to traverse what would have been a 15-minute walk on the descent route. At the upper mouth of the slot, I set her on a flat slab of chalk in the shade of an overhang and crouched to listen. I heard them. Not loudly. Vorsenari did not announce themselves. But there was a sound I had heard once in my life and never forgotten, the soft, low, throat-deep clicking that the cluster animals make when they are holding a position together. It was below us, 400 meters below, pooled at the lower mouth of the slot, exactly where I had thought they would be. I crouched in front of Velasan. "Listen to me," I said. "I am going to put you somewhere safe. You are going to stay very still. You are not going to look out. I am going to come back for you. Do you understand?" She watched my face while I said it. She did not understand the words. She understood what I needed her to understand. I have spent my life around small people of various kinds, and I have learned that small people understand the weight of a voice long before they understand its dictionary. She nodded once. I lifted her down off the slab and walked her 10 paces along the overhang to a fissure in the chalk wall, a vertical crack as wide as her small body and twice as deep, with a flat stone leaned against the lower end at a shallow angle. I lifted the stone aside. I slid her into the fissure. I leaned the stone back against the lower end. From 3 paces away the fissure was invisible. I could see her amethyst eyes if I bent down and looked, but no Vorsenari was going to bend down and look. "Stay," I said. She put both her small hands flat against the inside of the chalk and looked at me through the gap. I went down into the slot. I will not write at length about what happened in the slot, because there are things a man does in a slot canyon with 5 heat-tracking predators between him and a child and a sidearm with 3 magazines, and the writing of those things is not the part that matters. The part that matters is that I did not give them time to flank me. I came down the slot at full descent stride, and I was inside the lower mouth before the pack had finished registering the change in the heat signature of the prey they had been waiting for. I had the sidearm out by then. I put 3 rounds into 3 animals at ranges between 4 and 7 meters, and I did it without giving any of them time to break sideways. The 4th came in at me low and fast, and I did not get the sidearm onto it before it was on me, and we went down together onto the chalk floor of the slot. And what happened in the next 20 seconds happened with the folding knife, and one of the animal's 6 limbs hooked through the meat of my left forearm from the inside of the elbow to the heel of my hand. And at the end of the 20 seconds the animal was dead, and I was sitting up against the chalk wall, and the 5th animal was already running. A dusk gray streak across the lower mouth, going up the far slope at a long lope, gone. I sat back against the wall. My left arm was open from elbow to wrist along the inside, and the blood was coming out steadily, but not in the spurts that meant an artery. The forearm had been laid open across the soft side, not the deep side. I had been very lucky. I knew I had been very lucky because I had been doing this long enough to know the difference between very lucky and not very lucky, and what had just happened was the first one. I pressed the heel of my right hand into the wound and held it there for a count of 200. The blood slowed. I tore a strip from the lower edge of my shirt with my teeth in the right hand and wrapped it around the forearm and pulled it tight with my teeth in the right hand. Then I stood up. My head went briefly gray and then came back. I climbed the slot. Velasan was where I had left her. She was standing inside the fissure with both her small hands against the chalk and her face pressed to the gap. She had not made a sound. When she saw me coming up the slot, her amethyst eyes went very wide and then very still, in the way the eyes of small people go when they are taking in information they will not show on their faces. I moved the leaning stone aside. She came out of the fissure and looked at my arm. She did not cry, she did not gasp. She turned deliberately and reached up to her own shoulder and lifted the silver wing pin off her shift, and then she took the bottom hem of her shift between her 2 small hands and tore, and the cloth, which had looked simple, came apart along the weave like a cloth that had been designed to come apart along the weave, and she tore 3 long strips from the hem of her shift, calmly, one at a time, while I sat on the chalk floor of the overhang and watched her. She came to me with the 3 strips. She knelt at my left side. She lifted my forearm gently onto her small knees. She unwound my own torn shirt strip from around the wound and set it aside. She pressed the first long strip of her shift flat against the open wound, the length of it covering most of the cut. She wrapped the second strip around the forearm and the first strip, 3 turns, snug, the way someone wraps who has wrapped before. She wrapped the third strip around the second, in the opposite direction, finishing at the wrist. And then she lifted the silver wing pin from where she had set it on the chalk beside her, and she pinned the end of the third strip down to the second so it would not unwind, and she sat back. She looked up at me. "Vareth," she said. I nodded. I did not know what the word meant. I knew what she had just done. I did not know yet that the small carved silver wing pin had a name in the Velsaran houses, and that the name was the formal designation of her line, and that what she had just done with it was a thing that had been done in her people, only between persons whose lives had been bound under a particular and ancient household word, and that the wing pin, once pinned to a household-bound person by the daughter of a sovereign house, did not come back off until the household-bound person took it off himself, and that there were 6 recorded instances of it being done by a Velsaran of her standing in the last 4 centuries, and that in 5 of those 6 the wing pin had stayed on. I did not know any of this on the chalk floor of the overhang. I knew only that my arm hurt less than it had a minute ago, and that a small alien child had just bandaged it with the cloth of her own shift, and pinned the bandage down with the carved silver pin of her own shoulder, and that what was in her face when she sat back was the kind of attentive seriousness that a child wears when she has decided a thing and would like the larger person to register that she has decided it. I put my right hand on the back of her head, lightly, the way you put a hand on the back of the head of a small person who has done a thing well. "Thank you," I said. "We need to keep moving." She nodded. She got up. She came to my right side and took my right hand in her small 4-fingered hand, and we left the overhang and walked the last 6 kilometers down off the upland, in the long blue light of evening that comes to the Carantess after the day has finished, with the dust cooling under our boots and the high air thinning further as we descended. I was light-headed by the last kilometer. She was holding my hand. I do not remember every step of it. I remember the line of the chalk shelf coming up out of the dusk, and the low silhouette of the Federation prefab squatting on it, dark against the last band of orange in the western sky, and I remember thinking, "There it is, we made it." And then I remember sitting on the porch of the prefab with my back against the door, and Vela-san standing in front of me with her small hands on my knees, watching my face the way she had watched it in the wreck, patient and certain, waiting to find out what kind of larger person I was going to keep being. The post was unstaffed. The 2-man rotation was at the eastern relay for repairs. Their handwritten note was on the inside of the door when I got the door open. I knew this because I knew the rotation pattern. I lit the emergency panel. I sent a position-resolved distress on the low-band relay with the dress tin antenna folded down off the prefab roof. I drank a long swallow of the post's emergency water and gave Vela-san a longer one. I broke open the post's hard biscuit ration and gave her half. She ate it sitting on the floor of the prefab with her back against the wall, her shift hem now short and ragged from where she had torn the strips, her braid hanging down over her shoulder, the bend in the silver wing pin now pinning my bandage to my forearm instead of pinning her shift to her shoulder, and she watched me through the open door while I worked the relay panel. I lay down on the cot inside the prefab when the relay handshake confirmed. I had pulled the panel back up. I had locked the door. I had set the sidearm on the cot next to my right hand. Vela-san climbed up onto the cot and curled herself against my right side under my arm and was asleep within 90 seconds. I went asleep with my right hand on her back. I woke up in gray light. There was a sound outside that I did not recognize, a low, steady, rising whine, 4 sources, descending in formation. I sat up. My left arm screamed and I put it down again and used the right one. I went to the window of the prefab and looked. The formation was 4 low cruisers in silver-on-cream livery. They came in from the western ridge in a clean diamond, dropped their landing gear in unison, and sat down on the chalk shelf in front of the listening post with the soft hiss of repulse coil units balancing on packed dust. I had never seen the livery before. I had seen enough alien craft to know that these were not Federation, were not Vethani, were not any of the 6 or 7 affiliated traders that worked this corridor. They were silver on cream, the same silver and cream Velasan was wearing in her shift and her wing pin. The hatch of the lead cruiser opened. An honor guard came down the ramp first, 8 tall figures in fitted silver armor, ceremonial spears that I could see at the second glance were not ceremonial. The spearheads of a working alloy I would have recognized from any Federation armory. They formed up in 2 ranks on either side of the ramp and stood at parade rest with the spears at the high carry. Then she came down the ramp. She was tall, taller than the honor guard by half a head. She wore cream and silver, a long fitted coat that fell to her ankles, silver braid along the seams, a flat silver gorget at the throat. Her skin was the same pale lilac as Velasan's and her hair was the same silver, only it was unbound and fell straight down past her shoulders, and her eyes were not amethyst but a colder, paler violet, almost gray. She carried nothing. She was unarmed. She walked down the ramp alone, and when she set her boot on the chalk stone shelf, the honor guard came to a position I would have recognized in any of the 8 ranks of any army I had ever flown supplies to. The position you take in the presence of a person whose presence requires it. I knew what I was looking at before my mind had finished assembling the word for it. I had carried the daughter of a sovereign house down off the Carentess upland on my hip. I turned away from the window. Velasan was sitting up on the cot. She had heard the cruisers come down. She was looking at me. Her amethyst eyes were very wide, very awake. She did not look afraid. She looked like a child who had been waiting for the long part to end. "Velasan," I said. She got off the cot and walked across the prefab floor toward me and lifted her small 4-fingered hand toward the door. She wanted to be let out. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. She walked out onto the porch. The Velsaran Navigator Sovereign, and I would learn the title later, in a quiet briefing in a quieter room, but I knew on the chalkstone shelf already that the woman in front of me was the kind of woman a title like that fit, had crossed half the distance from the cruiser. She stopped when she saw the small figure in the open prefab door. I watched the Queen's face. There is a quality of stillness that comes onto the face of a person who has been doing a hard thing for longer than the person had thought she would have to do it, and who has at last been told that she is allowed to stop doing it. It is not relief. Relief is a smaller word for a smaller thing. It is closer to the stillness of a long-held breath in the last second before it is released. I saw that stillness come onto her face. Velasan went down the porch step and walked across the chalkstone shelf toward the Velsaran Navigator Sovereign. She did not run. She walked. The way a small person walks toward a known thing, not at the pace of someone trying to make the known thing happen faster, only at the pace of someone for whom the known thing is now no longer in doubt. The Queen knelt. I had not expected this, and I do not think any of the honor guard had expected it either, because there was a very small shift in the postures of the 2 nearest spear-bearers, the kind of shift a trained body makes when a trained body sees a thing that is not in the manual. She went down to one knee on the chalk in her cream and silver coat, and Velasan walked the last 3 paces into her arms. The Queen held her. I stayed where I was in the doorway, because nothing in that moment was about me, and nothing in that moment required me to be closer to it. It lasted 30 seconds, maybe 40, I did not count. And then Velasan turned in her mother's arms. She turned toward the prefab porch where I was standing. She lifted her small hand and pointed at me, not the way a child points to identify a thing she has been asked about, but the way a child points to invite a person she would like included. She said, "Vareth." Then she said it again, louder, because I had not moved. "Vareth, come." I came down off the porch step. I came across the chalk because she had asked me to. The honor guard stilled. The 8 tall silver-armored figures with their working spears at the high carry went quieter than they had been, the way a working unit goes quiet when something is happening that the unit's rules do not yet cover. The queen stilled. She was still on one knee on the chalk. Her arms were around her daughter. Her face was turned now toward me. The cold, pale violet eyes were on my face. The stillness that had been on her face when she had seen her daughter was no longer the stillness of the last second of a held breath. It was a different stillness. It was the stillness of a person who has just heard a word she did not expect to hear in a place she did not expect to hear it, and who is now thinking very carefully about what the word means in the place she has heard it. She looked at me. I stopped 3 paces from her, because 3 paces is the distance a man stops at when he is not certain what the distance is supposed to be, and 3 paces seemed to me to be on the safe side of whatever line I did not know was there. I held my left arm slightly out from my body, because the bandage Velasan had put on, it was still pinned with the silver wing pin, and I wanted her to see it. She saw it. The pale violet eyes went to the wing pin on my forearm and held there. Then they came back up to my face. Then they went to her daughter, to the half-empty hem of the shift, the strips Velasan had torn from it, the place where the pin had been on Velasan's shoulder and where the pin was now on my forearm, holding her cloth onto my wound. She looked back at me. The Velsaran navigator sovereign stared at me in silence, the kind of silence that lay across the chalkstone shelf like a held weight, the honor guard not moving, the dust not lifting, the 4 cruisers behind her ticking softly in the morning cool. And then she said, quietly, "Why does my daughter call you father, human?" I did not have a good answer ready. I had not been preparing one. I had not known the word she meant until she said it, and even hearing it now in her own language, in the formal Velsaran she was speaking, and somehow I understood the formal Velsaran she was speaking, though I had not heard it before. Later I would learn the cruiser's translation field had extended to the chalk shelf, and the honor guard had been hearing me in their tongue, and I had been hearing her in mine. I did not yet know what weight the word carried in her house. I knew only what I had done, and I knew that I had not done it for the word, because I had not known the word. I said the only thing I could think of to say. "She named me, ma'am," I only answered. The queen did not move. Velasan was still inside her mother's arms, her small face turned now to watch me, the amethyst eyes patient. The queen looked at her daughter. She looked at her daughter for a long time. She did not look at me again right away. When she did look at me again, she said, "Show me your arm." I came 1 pace closer. I held my left arm out. She lifted her free hand, her right hand, slow and deliberate, and her fingers touched the silver wing pin at the end of the bandage. She did not unpin it. She only touched it. The pad of her thumb rested on the carved silver wing for a long moment. Then she lifted her hand away. She did not stand. She stayed on one knee on the chalkstone shelf in her cream and silver coat, with her daughter against her shoulder, and her hand now resting on the small of her daughter's back. She looked up at me. "You did not know," she said. "No, ma'am," I said. "I'm sorry." "You did not know," she said again, and this time it was not a question, and it was not directed at me. It was directed at the chalkstone shelf and at the honor guard and at the 4 silent cruisers behind her, and at whatever record of the Velsaran houses she was now silently amending in her head. "You did not know what the word was. You did not know what the pin was. You did not know what would be asked of the person who answered, and you did it anyway." I did not know what to say to that. She turned her face down and pressed her forehead against the silver pale hair of her daughter for a moment. When she lifted her head again, her face had set into something quieter and harder, the face of a woman who has decided a thing, and the decision is irrevocable, and there will be a court behind her that will have to live with the decision. She turned her head and spoke a single word, a Velsaran word, 3 syllables, soft to the honor guard. One of the honor guard came forward. He carried, folded across his armored forearms, a long length of cloth woven silver and cream in a fine close weave, the length of a man, the width of a shoulder. He came to a halt 3 paces from the queen. He did not look at me. He waited. The queen stood slowly, with Velasan in her arms. She set her daughter down gently on the chalk beside her. Velasan kept hold of one of her mother's fingers. The queen took the length of cloth from the honor guard. She came the 3 paces to me. She lifted the cloth in her 2 hands, and she laid it carefully across both my shoulders, and she settled it at the back of my neck so it hung evenly down my chest on either side. "Vareth Sauron," she said, "of the household named by my daughter's word, witnessed by the carrying pin and by the hem of her shift. This is not a court designation. It is older than the court. It is the word the children give and the house's honor. I cannot unmake what my daughter has made. I would not if I could." She stepped back. The honor guard came to a position I did not recognize. It was a position they came to all at once, all 8 of them in the same unbroken movement, spears down to the low carry, blade points to the chalk, heads slightly bowed. They held it for the count of 4. Then they returned to high carry. The queen looked at me. "Will you come with us?" she said, and it was not a question to where she is going, until she is grown. Velasan was looking at me from beside her mother. Her small 4-fingered hand was wrapped around her mother's finger. Her amethyst eyes were on my face. Her face was not anxious. She was waiting to see what kind of larger person I was going to keep being. I said, "Yes, ma'am." That is the end of the part that matters. There was, of course, a great deal more that happened. The Velsaran cruisers lifted off the chalkstone shelf with all 4 of us aboard the lead vessel, and the Federation recovery team arrived 3 hours later to find the listening post empty, and the wreck of my freight shuttle still smoking on the ridge above, and a Velsaran flag tag laid carefully on the prefab porch by the Queen's own hand, to indicate that the matter of the missing pilot was no longer a Federation matter to resolve. The Federation and the Velsaran houses had a quiet diplomatic exchange over the next 40 days. My freight bond was voided not by penalty, but by transfer. I was reassigned under Compact Article 18 as the Federation civilian liaison to the Velsaran Inner Court, the first such posting in 240 years. I have been in that posting 11 years now. I am 54 years old. I sit on a chalkstone court terrace in the morning light most mornings of the warm season and drink grain tea from a small ceramic cup. The Velsaran navigator sovereign and I are not close, exactly. That is not the relation between a sovereign and a household protector of a daughter. But we are courteous, and we are, I think, in some way I have not entirely worked out, easy with each other. She has never asked me again about that morning on the chalkstone shelf. She has not needed to. Velasan is a navigator junior of the Velsaran houses now, 2 years from full standing. She is taller than her mother. She wears the cream and silver coat. She does not wear the original wing pin anymore because the original wing pin is in the breast pocket of my Federation field jacket, where it has been for 11 years, where she put it back the morning we left the chalkstone shelf, with the small ceremonial gesture of a daughter giving the pin into a household protector's keeping. It is bent across the center still. I have not straightened it again. It is straight enough. She comes out to the terrace most warm season mornings with a chart in her hand. She asks me about frontier weather patterns, the ones I logged in 14 years of freight running, the ones the Velsaran star cartographers do not have in their charts because the Velsaran star cartographers do not run freight. I tell her what I know. She listens with the same patient certainty she had in the prefab on the chalkstone shelf 11 years ago, the look of a small person waiting to find out what kind of larger person the larger person is going to be. She is not a small person anymore. The look is still the same. She calls me Vareth. She has never asked me in 11 years what I would prefer to be called. I have never asked her to stop. This morning, before I sat down to write this, she came out to the terrace with a chart of the Countess upland under her arm. She has been working on a survey revision for the Velsaran Federation Joint Cartography Office. She unrolled the chart on the small folding table between us and put her finger on a particular chalkstone shelf on the southwest slope of the ridge. "Vareth," she said, "tell me again about the listening post." I told her again about the listening post, the two-man rotation, the low-band relay, the dressed tin antenna folded down off the prefab roof, the handwritten note on the inside of the door. She listened. She made small notes on the chart in the Velsaran script. When I was done, she rolled the chart up again and stood with the chart under her arm and looked out across the terrace toward the eastern sky, where the morning light was coming in across the chalkstone court. "My mother says you did not know," she said without looking at me. "When you carried me off the ridge, you did not know what I was. You did not know what the pin was. You did not know what the word was." "No," I said. "I did not know." She turned her head and looked at me. "It is better that you did not know," she said. "It is better that what you did because of what was in front of you, not because of what you knew." She left the terrace after that. The grain teacup was still warm in my hands. The morning was cool and clear and dry, the chalk light coming in clean across the court. I sat for a long time. I am 43 years old in my own head, even now on the morning of the day on the ridge, even though my own head is 54. The crash and the wreck and the ridge and the slot and the chalkstone shelf are all still close. The taste of copper, the carving on the wing pin, the weight of a small alien child on my hip, the sound of 4 cruisers coming in over the western ridge. The stillness on the face of the Queen when she heard her daughter say the word. The small voice across the chalkstone shelf. "Vareth, come." I came. I am still coming. That is the only answer I have ever had for the question the Queen asked me on the morning of the 11th year ago, and it is the only answer I expect to have. She named me, I only answered.